Emily Haugen. Sergeant Travis Atkins was killed in Iraq in 2007 when he dove on top of a suicide bomber to save the other members of his team. Today at the White House, he will receive the posthumous Medal of Honor award for his sacrifice. Everyone in this room grew up in the United States, which is a democracy. The United States should not force democracy upon other countries. First, I will talk about how forcing democracy is ineffective. Next, I will discuss the cost. Finally, I will talk about the negative outcomes and effects that come from forcing democracy upon other nations. Spreading democracy by force is ineffective. Forcing democracy has no guarantee of success. Both Iraq and Afghanistan have yet to make a transition to democracy. According to Larry Diamond, professor of political science and sociology and former director of the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law at Stanford University, in the article, Why is America So Bad at Promoting Democracy in Other Countries?, states that nearly a quarter of the world's democracies have eroded or relapsed in the past 30 years. States that experience foreign-imposed regime changes also do not experience any significant democratic benefit. When foreign governments intervene in local governments, the target states either experience no effect or even a negative effect on subsequent democratic trajectory. Replacing a leader is not enough to establish a democracy. Changing a state's leader is not the same as changing its interests. When foreign governments target individual leaders for removal, but leave the underlying political institutions of a regime intact, democratization is unlikely to occur. Foreign-imposed leaders also face a paradox. If the foreign-imposed leader tries to implement the intervener's policies, they risk backlash from domestic actors. If the foreign-imposed leader tries to appease domestic voters by defying the intervener, they risk angering the intervener and provoking international conflict. The United States needs to fix the problems with its own democracy first. There are concerns that the current administration is emboldening foreign non-democratic behavior. Problems with American democracy have tarnished the brand of government that we are trying to sell to other countries. Now that I have told you about how spreading democracy by force is ineffective, I will talk about the cost. Spreading democracy comes at a high price and is simply expensive. The United States has spent $3 trillion to bring democracy to Iraq alone, and as I mentioned earlier, they have yet to make a transition to democracy. Spreading democracy is also highly time-consuming. Historically, establishing effective democracies has taken centuries. U.S. involvement in the war in Afghanistan is the longest amount of time that our country has been involved in any conflict. There have also been many lives lost in the pursuit of spreading democracy. In Iraq, from 2003 to 2011, there were 37,000 casualties, and in Afghanistan, through August 2016, there were 20,000 casualties. Now that I have told you what high price spreading democracy comes at, I will tell you about the other consequences. There are many negative outcomes and effects that can come from intervening in other governments to spread democracy. When foreign governments intervene, it can weaken local governments. According to Jonathan Monton, assistant professor in political science and director of the International Public Policy Program at the University College London, in the book U.S. Grand Strategy in the 21st Century, The Case for Restraint, states that regime-changing interventions weaken domestic institutions by cultivating dependence on external support. Foreign-imposed regime changes can also trigger violence in the target country. Regime changes in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya triggered chaos and violence and drew the United States deeper into expensive conflicts. There can also be backlash against governments imposed from the outside. Groups that have lost wealth, status, or power in the course of a democratic transition are likely to take up arms in opposition. Foreign-imposed regime changes can also trigger violence against the intervener. Foreign-imposed regime changes rarely improve relations between interveners and the target states. In fact, they often make them worse. Most foreign-imposed leaders are overruled and replaced with elites hostile to the intervener. According to Alexander B. Downs, Associate Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at George Washington University, in the journal You Can't Always Get What You Want, Why Foreign-Imposed Regime Change Seldom Improves Interstate Relations, states that failed attempts at covert regime change increase the probability of militarized disputes between the states involved. First, I talked about how intervening in other countries to spread democracy is ineffective. Next, I discussed the high price that it comes at. And finally, I talked about the negative outcomes and effect that come from forcing democracy. The United States should not force democracy upon other nations. Sergeant Travis Atkins would still be with us today if the United States did not think they could intervene in other countries and force democracy upon them.